Today, I'm chatting with a man on a mission to solve the problem of food shortage.
But we were completely wrong. It was really difficult to put soup in the carton. We spent 18 months,
His company started by making fresh soup available to you without having to cook it yourself.
but we didn't raise money to last us 18 months of development. We raised money to last us 2 or 3 months of development because we thought we'd get it in the carton and start selling. So that really felt like, we were going to fail before we even started.
You're going to hear all the problems they encountered and learn how they overcame them to become successful in that venture. He's also going to tell us about other food products he has made and why he's now decided to go all out and remove the problem of food shortage across the globe.
I'm not saying it's a solution to global warming, and I'm not saying it's a solution to war and strife in the future. But what we're trying to do is contribute to at any rate, or find a solution to satisfying the growing needs of this growing population. So feed the world without trashing the planet at the same time.
The theme this season is Embracing Life's Tapestry, and my guest is John Stapleton.
Yeah.
John, you had to cope with adversity before you achieved success when you set up the new Covent Garden Soup Company. Would you like to talk more about that?
Yeah, it's an obvious thing to say, adversity. It kind of goes hand in hand with lots of things. Somebody once said, and I'm not going to be able to attribute it to the right person, but show me anybody who's done anything worthwhile in life, and I'll show you somebody who's had to overcome adversity, meaning that if you're not encountering adversity, you're not doing anything worthwhile, which I think is so true in any walk of life, business in particular. And especially if you set up your own business, it's even more so. You're kind of putting yourself in harm's way almost. You're putting yourself in a way of a lot of adversity happening to you. And I think some people are aware of that and prepared for that, and others just aren't. They fall over the first hurdle. And I think the counter to adversity is resilience. And I think if you can demonstrate resilience in the face of adversity, then you stand a good chance of getting through that. And it's like not as if the world is out to get you, or it's not as if people are ganging up on you when you encounter adversity. Everybody encounters adversity, and the more worthwhile, the more adverse. If you set up your own business, you're doing things for the first time, guess what? You're going to have a lot of no's, a lot of obstacles, and a lot of people telling you you're wrong. But don't kind of whinge about that, because that's the way it is. Put all your energies into focusing on what you can actually do about it. I think if you're resilient, you just get up time and time and time again. And actually, the more no's you get, probably means you're going to get a yes around the corner from a probability point of view. If you really do know your business and know your consumer or know your customer, know your product, and you really do know what you're talking about, and you can justify it, the assumptions you've made, all the people who say no, they just haven't got it yet, or they're just not close enough. It's not that they're wrong, they just haven't got to a point to agree with you. And therefore you're right, and persevere. So much easier said than done, John, but that's how I'd kind of characterize that issue about embrace it. In fact, I'd say embrace adversity. It sounds like counterintuitive, but embrace adversity and turn adversity into your friend. If you do that, then you'll grow a thick skin. You won't get too upset when adversity comes knocking at your door, and you'll crack on through all those challenges. They won't seem as insurmountable as otherwise would be the case. That's what I'd say about adversity, and in the context of embracing life's tapestry. Doing anything worthwhile, adversity is a big part of it.
And when you managed to get the technique or the technology right in terms of getting soup into a carton with your co-founders, how did you feel at that moment in time?
Yeah, let me explain that one, because here's a carton, it happens to be empty, but here is a carton of soup, new Covent Garden soup. Now, it's kind of, we set this company up in 1987, John. So there's a lot of people who will not really, will probably think, well, I wasn't around in 1987. And soup, like fresh soup, has been around forever. Well, it's only been around since 1987 is the answer, because we sort of made it up and invented it. And right back in those days, we wanted to make soup. We wanted to make fresh soup, and nobody made fresh soup. So nobody put soup in a carton. In fact, all liquid soup came in a can. So if you wanted to find somebody to do this for you, and a lot of businesses outsource manufacturing, there's nothing wrong with that. But if you did want to do that, you go and talk to the manufacturer and you'd say, I want to make fresh soup. And they go, okay, how big do you want a can to be? And like, no, hang on, I want to be fresh soup. And the conversation would stop right there, because it didn't make any sense to anybody. And the point about fresh soup is that fresh soup tastes of the ingredients you use to put into it in the first place, which sounds kind of obvious, but carton soup, canned soup does not. Canned soup is sterilized and processed, and you kind of really completely ruin the flavor profile and the nutritional composition of the soup or whatever you put in the can. And so to compensate for that, you have to put other things into it, which makes it taste nothing like the fresh ingredients did originally. So we weren't trying to emulate that. We weren't trying to have a product that tasted of the process that made it safe and gave it a shelf life and sterilized and put in the can. We wanted to generate a process that allowed the product to taste of the ingredients we put in. And that we decided was going to be in a carton. And one of the key pieces, having decided all of that, one of the key pieces is quite obviously putting soup into the carton. And you might think that's a very straightforward process and a very straightforward step. And so did we at the time. But we were completely wrong. It was really difficult to put soup in the carton. We spent 18 months, did you not, 18 months trying to put soup into a carton like this. And you know, the response to that might be, really? I mean, what were you doing for 18 months? And I won't go into all the detail, but I became an expert in what was called soft solids in suspension. It's a very exciting term, but that's what it was. Is basically these systems, which were designed to fill cartons at the time, back in the 80s, were carton filling machines which were designed to fill milk, because that's what you found in a gable top carton. And milk is uniform. There's no bits in it. Not meant to be anyway. And milk is usually liquid and cold when you fill it. And the hotter you make something, the more non-viscous, the more watery it becomes. So it's even more difficult to fill it, especially if there's bits in it. So you got to keep all these bits or soft solids in suspension, in whatever you're holding it, and then pour it into the carton the best way you can to fill it up to the right level, have the right number of bits in it, not have any dribbles around the outside, and it's hot. So it's a really difficult process. And we took it for granted, and we spent 18 months getting it right. So at times we were sitting there looking at each other with soup on the walls and soup on the floors and soup on the ceiling and no soup in the bloody carton. It was really frustrating. And we thought it was a really simple step to get right. And it took us 18 months to get it right. In the end, we did get it right. And that was a great relief. But we didn't raise money to last us 18 months of development. We raised money to last us 2 or 3 months of development because we thought we'd get it in the carton and start selling. So it wasn't just the difficulty at putting technically soup in a carton, but it was the whole business was grinding to a halt. And we didn't have money to take us through that entire stage of doing nothing but trying to put soup in a carton. So that really felt like, we were going to fail before we even started. We can't get soup in a carton. We can't make it, never mind sell it and then market it. And then we had that breakthrough. So, that was an extremely stressful, extremely adverse situation. But back to the quote earlier, it was really worthwhile. And one point that I'll make in addition is we didn't know it at the time, but that struggle that we had putting soup in a carton, this was our greatest asset in the end, because many competitors came into the market later. But none of them put soup in a carton. They all put soup in plastic bags or pouches or plastic tubs. And the reason they did that, they didn't want to put it in the carton because we owned the carton, in effect. So the brand name, New Covent Garden Soup Company, it became known as soup in a carton. And the carton was part of the brand, and the identity was part of the brand. So all that effort of putting soup in a carton, we thought was just, we wanted to put in a carton because it spoke freshness, which it did, and it was great. And we put it in the chiller, which is great. Soup didn't belong in the chiller. But also the consumers loved it. And the brand became the carton. And to this day, which is whatever, 35 years later, you will not find any fresh soup in the retail scene in the UK or in Ireland for that matter that is in a carton. That is still owned by New Covent Garden. It's still the market leader and it's still out there.
Well done. And then you eventually sold that business and you headed to the States, thinking that you could replicate the same technology and the same idea in the States. Would you like to talk more about that? And this is where you encountered more adversity.
Well, that's right. And ignorance is bliss a lot of the time. I constantly say that actually ignorance being bliss is a benefit, because sometimes you don't know how high that mountain is that you're about to climb. We certainly didn't with New Covent Garden. I mean, I came out of university. My business partner, Andrew, he was a stockbroker. None of us knew anything about anything that you needed to know about in terms of business or soup or the food industry or anything. So we made a whole bunch of assumptions, a lot of which were wrong, some of which were right. The same is true with Glencoe Foods, and Glencoe Foods was the second business. and that was interesting because it was kind of like more or less the first business part two. But that means that we made a few assumptions and we were underestimated what we actually had to do. So it's kind of like I do know whose quote this is. It's Mark Twain's, and he said the UK and the US are two countries divided by a common language. And you can replace UK for Ireland there. It doesn't really matter. It's basically the English speaking part of the world when we go to the States or vice versa. We kind of think, how difficult can that be? It's like, they speak English, they're similar to us. Let's do what we did over here or over there. And there's a lot more to it than that. And yes, that was adversity part two, but like to part 10, because the business failed, right? Now, if anybody knew anything about fresh soup, business-wise, technology-wise, marketing-wise, any wise you care to think of, having had the success and the 10 years of building New Covent Garden in the UK, it should have been me, right? I should have known what I was talking about. So I went out to the States and brought the technology over with me, set up a business, built a factory based on what we did in the UK, raised a lot of money from shareholders, and the way you raise money from shareholders is say, trust me, I know what I'm talking about. And I have a lot to point to that I do know what I'm talking about. Brought a team on board. When you're setting up a business, you're selling. You're selling the concept to raise money. You're selling the product when you get it on the shelf. You're selling the idea and the vision to bring people into your team. And it's all about, you're out there and people are having their, place their trust in you. Now, the flip side of that is when it goes horribly wrong, is you're very exposed and you're standing there and you think you've let everybody down, and you have let everybody down. So that was an extremely adverse situation. But what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And I think, call it adversity or call it failure or call it whatever it is. It was failure on a grand scale because the business 5 years in, we had to pull the plug. So it was clearly a failure. And it's really quite difficult coming on the back of a success to then go into a failure. People think, oh, well, success was great. Yes, but it then generates a level of expectation that the next thing you do will be successful, especially if it's not that different from what you've done before, right? So there's a lot of expectation there. And so I'm a great believer that there's another quote, no idea who said this, but I really believe this too. It's like success is a lousy teacher. Because normally when you got success in a business context anyway, there's a whole bunch of reasons for that success. And you're putting a whole bunch of different levers to be successful. And actually, when you look back on it, you kind of think, well, why was that successful? What made that a success? And there's not one thing you can point to. Whereas when you have a failure, you're much more exposed. And a lot of the time, the failure, actually or perceived is you. And you certainly perceive that you are the reason for the failure because who else failed? So it's a very interesting kind of introspective place to be. And it hurts like hell. But I think actually coming out of it, and this is all, of course, with a great deal of hindsight, it's very difficult to have these thoughts when you're in the valley of darkness. But coming out the other end, you kind of then look back at it and I realized failure is not a great place to be because it does hurt like hell. But it's a wonderful place to have been because it makes you make sure you never want to be there again. You never want to feel that shitty again, frankly. It's just such an awful place to be on so many levels. And the only benefit that comes out of it, only learning that comes out of it is that, okay, I'm never going to be here again. And what does that mean? Well, for me, it meant setting up a third business. So I came back from the States and set up my third business, which is called Little Dish. Yeah. Now, Little Dish is a range of healthy, convenient, tasty meals for kids, right? There are other things we launched as well, like snacks for kids, etc. So again, it's food and it's in the fresh category and it's similar in lots of ways to the soup company, but that's obviously very different category, different target market. And Little Dish is very interesting in lots of ways. And we spent 10 years growing it and we sold that. And by the way, John, I sometimes refer to my career as the shit sandwich. It's like a nice story to start with, successful, exited, shareholders are happy. A nice story to end with, successful, shareholders very happy, commercially success at any rate. And in the middle, a whole bunch of shit. And it's a bit of a joke, but I can laugh at it now, but it really was. And for those people who know me, they're sick and tired of hearing me saying, I learned more from those 5 years in the middle, the shitty bit, from the 10 years I did on the other side combined. I think that's a great value of of failure. I think sometimes people kind of want to forget the failure because it's so painful. I just want to put it behind them because it's too embarrassing, or a whole bunch of reasons why you just kind of it just didn't happen. I'll just busy myself going on to the next thing. Definitely go on to the next thing. But the real benefit I felt from was I'm just not never going back to there. And I honestly believe that one of the major reasons that Little Dish was a success in the end was because the business in the States was a failure. Not because the first business was a success at all, really. It's just that the failure propelled me forward to do something. I had to prove I could do it again. I had to prove I wasn't going to go out on a failure, to prove it to everybody, but mostly to myself. And that was a great learning lesson. Absolutely. You can't, learn that from a book. You can't learn that from doing an MBA. You can't learn it from secondhand. You got to learn from the experience. And while it was a very chastening experience, it gave me a lot of, I derived a huge amount of benefit from it. It gave me a lot to springboard on to make the third business a success.
I can concur with you there, John, to a large extent when you talk about adversity and then success and then failure again, because I've had my fair share of failures in life. I selected the wrong profession, working in accountancy. I had success in accountancy, but I also incurred or encountered downtimes or failures. But I learned more from those failures about myself as a person, professionally and personally. And now I'm doing work that's really aligned to my values and purpose in life. So I think you have to go through the hard times to discover the real person within yourself. So I think both of us have been on that journey to maybe to a larger or greater extent than other people. So I can
Sure.
concur with your feelings there. In terms of life in general, what inspires you most to be successful in life?
Wow. Where do you start there? I think the first thing is how do you define success? And I guess what are the benefits of being older is that there are lots of different ways to define success. I think early on it's very difficult because you haven't experienced success. And I think it's easy certainly to just gravitate towards success in terms of commercial success. The commercial success I'm not knocking it, don't get me wrong. It counts for a lot. It buys freedom. It demonstrates a lot. People probably in a one-dimensional way look at it most of the time as the only definition of success, and it's not. And I would say that alongside commercial success is proving somebody wrong. There's a great benefit. There's a great feeling from doing that. And with New Covent Garden, we had so many people telling us we were wrong to even consider doing this. I'll give you a few quick examples. We had the food scientists telling us that we'd kill somebody if we ever really put fresh soup in a carton. There's a reason soup goes in a can, and that is to sterilize it entirely. Soup, I won't bore you with the details, but it has lots of risk attached to it. It has lots of contamination risk attached to it. It can easily go off and easily poison you. You can easily have a dicky tummy from having anything that has gone off. But soup really, is a multitude of problems there. So therefore, the traditional approach or the conventional wisdom was to sterilize it, makes it safe, gives it 18-month shelf life. But as I said earlier, it doesn't taste like what went into the can in the first place. And people told us who were experts in that field is you will kill somebody if you try to not sterilize soup. Don't mess with it. Um, and I think when we sold New Covent Garden Soup Company, it's already 1998 or something. It's about like 10 or 11 years after we set it up. We had sold 50 million cartons roughly. And to my knowledge, we hadn't killed one person by then. And I'm sure they haven't either since then. They've sold a lot more. So that was the one big, that's a scary thing to be told by an expert. You will kill somebody. And the second thing that I said is when soup in a carton. I mean, soup doesn't belong in a carton. And back then, those days, milk was in a carton, and that was about it. Maybe orange juice you come in a carton too, but soup didn't belong in a carton. And they used to say, look, don't if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Don't reinvent the wheel. All these really smart things that people say, right? Go down the road, the aisle there. There's a thing called a soup aisle. That's where you'll buy soup. That's where your mother bought soup, and that's where her mother bought soup. So don't mess with it. It's soup. And he said, yeah, but it's canned soup and it's ambient, and we want to, we want to do something different. I said, look, people want to understand it. Retailers want to understand it. Consumers want to understand it. There's a place for soup. It's down there. He said, no. More of the experts told us that, and the other experts then about in terms of the consumers, they said they'd be just confused as hell. That they won't expect to find soup in a carton. They won't expect to find a carton in a chiller. It'll just be confusing and it won't work. Well, the consumers loved the carton. We had people bringing soup to the office because it was an aspirational brand. It was a cool thing to do back in the 80s and 90s. Maybe it still is, but people, it was a novel approach. People were quite happy being associated with this hip new way of consuming soup, right? Um, and the other thing about the carton is when all the other competitors came in, nobody put it in the carton. Nobody else put the fresh soup in the carton other than Newcombe Garden. So a whole bunch of things we were told, which really is associated with the conventional wisdom of the day. I think if you're an entrepreneur, you have to have the courage of your convictions. The conventional wisdom is the way things always have been done for reasons that were probably true back then, but nobody really challenged them. And we were trying to challenge them, not for the sake of challenge, but we wanted to achieve a whole bunch more, which putting soup in a can was preventing us from doing. So by making sure that we put soup in a carton and inevitably not listening to all those people who told us we were crazy and we were wrong and soup in a carton won't work, it's a lot to then have the arrogance, frankly, or the ego to say, I'm listening to all those experts and I'm still going to do it anyway. And I think, if you have the courage of your convictions and you really do know your consumer and you really do know what you're trying to achieve and it's something different that's gone on before, then crack on and do it. I think you need to check in every so often with reality to make sure you're right. And we didn't get it right in the States. But that's no reason, not to try. And I think therefore the success of Newcomen Garden was a lot to do with ignorance is bliss, a lot to do with these two young guys who didn't really know what they were doing and made it up going along the way, and a lot to not to accept the conventional wisdom, and have the courage of our convictions. Our convictions were rooted in good consumer insight, and it wasn't just we're just making up think this would be great. We thought this was great because we thought there were justifiable reasons for that, and we knew the consumer group. So that would be in essence the message about challenging conventional wisdom and doing things differently, not listening to the people who have been around for decades and who basically said things to us like, "But it was such a good idea, somebody would have done it by now." Well, that's the most entrepreneurial thing I've ever heard, right? If that were the case, nobody would ever press flesh or extend themselves or go over boundaries that they didn't even know existed. So that's what I've done all my life, by the way. So I don't know any different. So that's how it's worked out for me.
Indeed. Since you exited Little Dish, John, you have moved on to better and brighter things. You have your fingers in many pies. Looking at your LinkedIn profile, you're associated with Board Bia. I think you're involved with a university up in Ulster, but you're also an entrepreneur, investor, and now a professional speaker. What encouraged you or inspired you to change career track when you exited Little Dish?
That's a really good question because I've done three businesses. So what am I qualified to do? A fourth one, you might say. And it is tough, and I wasn't prepared to do it a fourth time. I mean, you have to be a masochist to do it two or three times anyway. And a fourth time was just taking it to a bit too far. And that's for the personal reasons why it just didn't make sense for me to do a fourth business. But what I do like and what I do now is the variety. And by the way, this variety was really elusive for me to start with because I thought originally when you set up your own business, you have a really varied life. Certainly from a business perspective, you get to do everything yourself. Like when you start a business, you do everything yourself because usually there is only you or maybe you have a co-founder. Between you and the two of you, you get everything done. And for quite some time, you're still doing a lot of stuff. You might bring a few people on your team, etc., but you're still doing a lot. And I just think, therefore, that was a really broad experience until I realized, until I stopped setting up my own business and doing what I do now, which I'll expand on a little bit more. I now have a much more varied life and a lot more things that I do that are different to each other. And the thing about having your own business, even though you think you're doing everything, having a varied life, you're not. It's just one business. Actually, so it's not broad. It's very, very, very narrow. It's very deep. It goes all the way down and keeps going through the earth and it keeps going never ending. So it's very deep, but it's not very broad. What is broad is what I do now. Lots of different businesses and exposed to lots of different entrepreneurs. And I sit on boards. If I invest in a business, I usually take a seat on the board and try to add value in that way. Or I might be a mentor to an entrepreneur or advise a business or I invest indirectly through into businesses now through different vehicles. We'll talk about that when we have a moment, perhaps Mission Ventures and the Retail Food Fund. Mission Ventures is based in London, Retail is based in Dublin. And these are all different ways to invest in businesses indirectly. So I have a lot more varied approach to life now, and I like that variety. Now, the key point is, though, that it's not very deep. It's very, very broad. It was the opposite to what I did before, which is very, very narrow, but very, very deep. So I actually don't do anything. And that's a key point. With my own business, I used to do everything. What I do now is I don't do anything, because if I did, I'd be getting in the way of the people who are meant to be doing the doing. And that is a catastrophe to do that. So I advise and I support and I criticize and I find ways to add value as much as I possibly can. That's been a completely new challenge for me. And I like learning. I like learning new ways of doing things or new things to do. So that's been a really interesting evolution for me. We sold Little Dish in 2017. And ever since then, I've been doing more of this. So yeah, I do a bit of speaking, certainly. I talk about, I talk about things like embracing adversity and learning from failure and the power of authenticity and having the courage of convictions and things like that, which I've mentioned. And I have lots of different stories and anecdotes and examples that I can use, which brings that to life, both business stories and non-business stories. I talk about things that happened in my childhood and when I was younger, not just things that, struggles that with the business in the States or Little Dish or New Covent Garden. So I like doing that. I like piecing it together in a way that explains or hopefully makes sense of my life, my experience, my journey. But then in addition to that, I invest in businesses and I add value that way, typically in the food and drink space. And you mentioned a few other things I'm involved with Board Bia. I'm less involved with Board Bia these days, but we still are very close in terms of the startup scene and the ecosystem in Ireland. Involved with University of Ulster as well, in food entrepreneurship, and lots of other things that I've been involved with too. I guess the two things to mention which I have is the Retail Food Fund, which is we are a VC. We are dedicated to food and drink startups in Ireland. So it's an Irish VC, and we're dedicated to curtailed to investing in businesses in Ireland. So it's very much designed for the Irish market. And we've recognized that basically there's the food and drink startup situation or ecosystem in Ireland is starved of investment, and it's starved of investment to allow businesses to grow. So that's why we set up the fund. And Mission Ventures very quickly is it's not, it sounds like a fund, it's not, it's really an accelerator or incubator program. And what we do really is when businesses get funding, and we help them with that, we then advise them how to spend the money well. So we get them ready for growth. So we try to make sure you've got to do this, and this as fundamentals, and then build from there. And that is investing the money wisely that they get from other sources. And there are other things I do too, but perhaps I don't have time to go into all of them. But these days, in terms of embracing life's tapestry, well, the tapestry is much more colorful and much more varied. And that coming back to the full circle, the variety is what I enjoy most, or what stimulates me most, which in hindsight I didn't really have at my own business. I had other things in my own business. But what I do now is fulfilling in lots of different ways.
Yeah, I'm the same myself, John, to be honest, because when I was working in accountancy, it was very deadline oriented, and I was always under pressure to meet deadlines and get reports out and to do forecasts and budgets and year-end accounts with auditors and all that good stuff. So it was all pressure, pressure, pressure. But now that I'm running my own business, although there's pressure at times, the variety of the work appeals more to me as a person.
Right.
And I don't have to do things too regularly. I can decide what I want to do and when I want to do it, more or less, so I've got more control over my life, and I do like the variety in my work also. So I can concur with you in that also.
Yeah.
John, I know you for a good number of years. You grew up on a beef farm in Roscommon.
That's right.
And now we're seeing into the British Isles, the UK and Ireland, Northern Europe, for example, vertical farming. What is vertical farming? And why do people see a future in vertical farming?
Right. Okay. To explain what vertical farming is, it'll take quite some time. Let me do it in a kind of a most summarized way that I possibly can. And you're right. I grew up in a beef farm in County Roscommon, and never did I think, whatever 40, 50 years later, I'd be involved in farming again. But it is farming with a difference. It's called vertical farming for a reason. Traditionally, vertical farming isn't that old, but in the last maybe 10 years or so, vertical farming was associated with a vertical building, and there were lots of different levels in that building, and in each level would have the facility for growing something, plants. Um, and there's no soil in a vertical farm. That's the first thing. So it's really based, well, there are different versions of vertical farming, to be fair. But the one we are involved in, the company called Fischer Farms, based in the UK. I'm chairman of Fischer Farms. What we do is it's a hydroponic version, which means that the plants grow in water more or less, or certainly the roots dangle into water. And in that water is lots of nutrients, which we add. And they absorb the nutrients into the seed and it germinates. And then also the leaves grow. And the leaves grow under lights. That's where the photosynthesis occurs. So there's lots of lights which give out the particular wavelength of light that encourages growth and is very efficient for photosynthesis. And that is just repeated over and over again. So you get lots and lots and lots of layers like this. And that's where the vertical bit comes from. And so we can control the environment, like the relative humidity and the temperature in particular, and other variables. We can control the nutrients, and it's a very consistent growing environment, which means, of course, then that we can have a very consistent, good quality product 365 days of the year. So in a post-Brexit world in the UK, not only that, in lots of different countries, but we're starting in the UK, it stands for a huge advantage from the point of view of food security, right? So we can say to a retailer in the UK, we've got this product, it's a very good quality product, it's consistently good, so it's every single day the same, because there aren't that many variables, it's grown indoors, and we control the environment. And we don't have any pesticides because we don't have any pests, right? We don't have any weather conditions. So we can go back to old style seeds that have been, have evolved in a direction to cope with adverse weather conditions, as opposed to being flavorsome or having the best quality. So, modern farming technology and modern farming methods has evolved in that direction. We can obviate the need for all of that because we grow indoors. So food security, from a UK perspective, they import, I've forgotten the numbers now, but an enormous imbalance in how much food they import versus how much food they produce in a very large population. And the second major advantage, well, there's two already. The third major advantage is the sustainability, right? Like, we don't have any pests indoors. Obviously, we don't need pesticides, for example. We use 3% of the water that an arable farm would use, right? So our vision is to be able to place these vertical farms in the future in parts of the world that are arid or that have become arid. One of the big problems that the world is facing is that land use, good quality land use, number one, and access to water is diminishing at an enormous rate while the population is growing. And climate change is like, adding fuel to the flames here. And particularly in areas of the world where countries are very vulnerable and society is very vulnerable. I'll give you an example where in Egypt, in fact, before the war, Egypt imported 100% of their flour from the Ukraine. So clearly overnight they had a major problem. That's to try to diversify. Some countries can diversify better than others. But there's an immediate problem, which over time can only get worse if you don't find a solution to it. And what we're trying to do is build these large vertical farms attached to very large solar farms in areas where there's lots of sun, obviously, using 3% of the water. So the water isn't a problem. And can keep the indigenous population where it wants to stay and doesn't have to migrate to other parts of the country, typically north in that case. So I'm not saying it's a solution to global warming, and I'm not saying it's a solution to war and strife in the future. But what we're trying to do is contribute to, at any rate, or find a solution to satisfying the growing needs of this growing population. So feed the world without trashing the planet at the same time. And maybe in 10, 15 years' time, we'll be able to grow things like wheat and rice and soy indoors, which are kind of staple ingredients, staple food products that local indigenous populations need in that part of the world. Right now, we're starting with green leafy things. So it's like salad, bag salad, and herbs. And the technology exists for that. Harvesting that in an automated fashion is within our grasp. And we're building a very large farm in Norfolk, which is probably one of the certainly biggest in the world. And that's really exciting. That's coming on stream as I speak. But our plan is to grow soft berries and fruits in the next generation. And then ultimately, maybe it's 15, 20 years down the road, be able to grow staples in parts of the world where staples are diminishing as a commodity.
It's a very fascinating development because if you just think about the most recent summer here in Ireland, last July was a washout, and it really impacted tillage farmers because they couldn't get into fields to harvest their crop, whether it was wheat or barley, whatever the case may be, So, and then you know, tillage farmers are at the mercy of prices. Prices fluctuate over the over years, so you can encourage a profit. You can get a good profit one year if the weather's conditions are in your favor. Another year, if it's a washout, you incur massive losses. So yeah, it's a fascinating industry, to be honest. One final question for you, John. If you were given the opportunity to have one single request granted to you without question, what would that be? Personal or business?
Um, I think that's another question that you might answer differently in the different sort of stages of your life. Maybe in your 20s and 30s, you might want something different. I think, getting it, I'm 59, right? So I'll be 60 very soon. I'll be 60 this year, or in 1964. So there you go. So what does that mean? And my mom, very thankfully, is still very hale and hearty, and still alive in County Roscommon, and she's 93. It's very amusing. She says to me sometimes, all the people that I grew up with, certainly, and all the people I knew, and all my friends, they're all dead. And she's very amusing about it, but it's true. And so she's now hanging out with 70-year-olds, stuff like that, which is fantastic to see that. But that's the attitude that she has. My point is, though, that I think as we get older, and as our parents get older, we're confronted by the frailty of life, and we're not going to live forever. Everybody knows that, but you don't think about that when you're 20 or 30 or even 40. I think when you're 50 and 60 and 90, you clearly, understand that you're not going to live forever. And I think the frailty of life and the fact that we're here for a period of time, and you kind of look back in your life and think, have I done enough with it, and all those sort of introspective things you can think about. But actually, I think the other thing you think about is how lucky I am, and we live in this modern society with all these, I hate the word mod cons, but we do have a huge amount going for us compared to other civilizations or other parts of the world. So answer to your question, it's the boring word health. I think we take it for granted far too much. I think as entrepreneurs, we clearly take it for granted. We abuse ourselves so much by not getting enough sleep and leading stressful lives, and we say, oh well, stress is for wimps, and crack on with it. Well, I understand what you mean, but actually it's not. And stress is there as a pressure relief. And if you can react to it and accommodate that, great. But don't crack on, ignoring stress or ignoring stress symptoms or ignoring getting colds all the time and working your way. I haven't got time for a cold. I get it. I've been there. I've done it myself. I've never had time for a cold. Never could never accommodate any of that. But the older you get, the more more reminders you get about how you're here for a finite period of time and immortality doesn't exist. And I think then it's never too late to look after your health. It's never too late to say, okay, I'm going to get enough sleep and drink enough water, not drink so much alcohol, and take more exercise. All those things which we all know, but a lot of us don't make enough time to accommodate, especially if you got this really all-encompassing role, which is setting up and running a business. So I think it's just being aware of. I'm not talking about being a vanguard or changing dramatically how you live your life. But I think it's just making time, being aware, listening to your body when you've got pains and aches and creaks, and taking time out, just having a little bit more of respect for the fact that you're here for a short period of time, relatively speaking, and look after yourself. And if you can incorporate that into your busy, hectic lifestyle, because we're all very ambitious, we want to do things, crack on and do all that. But don't expect your body to keep turning up day after day after day if you don't look after it. And I think there are things we can easily do, just a little bit of a switch of emphasis, which we can do in our daily lives, that mounts up over years to make a huge difference. I'm lucky that it happens to be pretty healthy, and I did sports when I was younger and all the rest of it. So I never even thought about it. But that's the part of the problem I'm talking about. Never really thought about it. And I think we all should just think about it and keep it raving at the back of our minds, every so often at the front of our minds. So if that was the one thing, 100% guaranteed health, I wouldn't have to think about all those things. But none of us have that luxury So we do need to think about those things, and we certainly should.